there have been references to things like the Book of Life in the Old Testament, or the mind of God, or the universal mind. Just these references that we can find across so many spiritual and religious traditions across time and space.
Welcome to the Angelic Frequency Podcast. We are your hosts, Cristina Aroche
and Luisa Velez. And today we had a fascinating discussion with our guest. We can't wait for you to hear about it. It was the masterclass about the Akashic Records. So interesting, so informational. She's a teacher, and it shows because this was just her for the most part. It was amazing. So let's dive in.
All right, we're back for another episode, and we have a special guest today, Josephine. Welcome. We're so excited to have you here.
Yeah, thank you so much for making space for this conversation today. I am thrilled to be with you.
And we are thrilled to have you. This is such an interesting topic, and we can wait to dive in. But maybe that's even a great place to start. Not a lot of people are familiar with you and your work and the Akashic Records, of course. So let's start with your journey and who you are. I was reading you are a second generation healer, so it runs in the family for you.
That's true. Yes. And actually it was my mom that first. So my growing up, my mom was a psychotherapist and a healer at the same time. So she had like one foot in each world, if that makes sense. And she was the one who introduced me to the Akashic Records when I was 17.
So young.
So 21 years ago now.
Wow.
Yeah, she bought a book about the records and started studying them for, to serve her own clients. And then thought, oh, maybe this is something that my daughter is going to enjoy, because I already did, meditation, yoga, mindfulness, all those things, because I grew up in a spiritual home. So she said, oh, check out the Akashic Records. And that's when I first opened them a while ago. But then my journey is kind of interesting because, and I think people are likely to relate to this, but growing up also, I was a highly sensitive person, highly empathic, very attuned to everyone else's emotions, right? And at some point, I think it became too much for me, like being so open and being so, just feeling everything so deeply. So part of my path is that I retreated into my head and into my intellect and mental faculties, right? So I went into an academic career, got a PhD in English literature, I taught at the college level for 9 years. I was just going to stay there and be a professor. But I started to feel, oh, there's something in my heart that's calling me to be elsewhere while I was still in academia. It was like, there's something that's missing. You're supposed to be somewhere else, doing something else. And I started to feel this a little bit of a sense of grief in my heart that, like, oh, maybe I'm not exactly where I'm supposed to be. I loved teaching. I loved interacting with students because I am a teacher. I still teach now, just a very different topic. But there were many aspects of the academic world that were not aligned and that were fueling things like my perfectionism or my seeking external validation and approval, right? It was fueling and feeding a lot of that. So eventually I had to make the decision to leave that academic career, which was, I'm going to say 8 years ago now. I left, and that's when I started building my spiritual business kind of from the ground up. But luckily, I already had so many tools like the Akashic Records in my back pocket that I could pull out. And then I got, formally trained in the records and intuitive healing and all of that, which are the tools and the practices that I use now and also teach my students and clients. So I think that brings us up to the present. Does that make sense?
I think for me personally, it feels like this is going to connect with a lot of people who go through this journey. Generally, light workers find themselves doing something else and trying to, just make a living like traditional way. Just,
Yes, I know, like be
pursuing worldly
successful, quote
things.
unquote, be
Yeah,
successful, right? Have a
exactly.
traditional life. Yeah.
Yeah, so we're just kind of put on a certain path, and then also Christina has been talking about soul remembrance and coming back, and just really listening to your soul and what it's trying to tell you, and what you were put on this earth to do on a soul level, and trusting that and following that journey. So I think it's the perfect intersection of many things that we've been talking for a while. And just personally, I see so many parallels with your story also.
Yes.
Sensitive, this was growing in a spiritual household, but it being overwhelming too much, and then just pursuing it intellectually, but not as something that you do, and then kind of and that coming back and that remembrance. So
Yes.
I definitely see myself there in so many of the things that you said. So I love it so much.
I'm so glad. Yeah, I
I'm
love that
just
word, remembrance. Yeah, I think like so many people currently are navigating that process, and it takes a lot of courage. So when I made that decision, okay, I'm going to leave this stable career, benefits, retirement plan, all of the things that the world tells me I need to have, right? Which are still like, those are still good things to have.
right.
But as I said, there was something in me that was just like, this is not the highest purpose that you're here to fulfill. And you can still have, and actually, you don't have to compromise. Like, you can leave this traditional career and build something even better for yourself and more aligned, which is what I did. And yeah, it took courage, and there was a learning curve, growing a business from the ground up, never having done that before. There was so many lessons and mistakes and falling flat on your face and then getting back up again, which is part of the evolutionary journey as well. So, yeah.
Yeah. I love that. And I can also just relate so much to the journey as well. I can also see parallels with my own journey. And 2017 was also a pivotal time for me. It's very similar, like pursuing a path in science. And like kind of, I was in that direction. And before that, I was kind of like in that mind frame of, I'm going to, get my master's and then my PhD. I'm going to be a research scientist, like do all these things. And then it was very similar during the same time period, a turning point for me that was just like, no, that's not what I'm here to do, and switched into that similar time period, which is really cool to see the timelines. And I
Yeah.
find that 2017 is a big year. I've heard from a lot of people. 2020, I feel like 2022, 2025 also. Like, I don't know, there's these time periods I feel like where it's, I don't know if it's the calls of waves of light workers
Right.
and healers coming forward, but
Yeah.
it's very interesting to
So,
see. And I
yes.
love
Yeah.
that. And I love
But
your story. It's very
yeah.
inspirational.
And I think, for any and all of us, like none of those skills are lost, right? Or experience or expertise. Like, I know I'm of the belief that, nothing that we've done up until this point is wasted. Like, it's not going to go to waste, even if it felt like a little bit of a detour or a big detour at the time, but none of that is wasted. We can still bring those skills and that wisdom and that experience and whatever we have gathered, and like make it part of the work that we're doing today, which I definitely do with teaching. Like, I bring a lot of those skills still. So that's still something we can bring to the table, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So I want to hear about the Akashic Records. Let's dive into that because I think this is the part we've all been waiting for. Let's start with the very basics for someone who maybe has never heard about the Akashic Records or is not very familiar. How would you describe the Akashic Records, and how can we use it? I know there's probably many different ways, but if you want to also outline the ways in which we can use it to support our journey.
Yes, great questions. So, what are the Akashic records? First of all, references to what we today call the Akashic records go back to antiquity. So there have been references to things like the Book of Life in the Old Testament, or the mind of God, or the universal mind. Just these references that we can find across so many spiritual and religious traditions across time and space. So in a way, it's like the records have always existed, right? They've always been there, and they always are there. And if we break down the name, right, so Akashic or Akasha comes from the Sanskrit, and it's a word we can translate it in a few different ways, but one way is as an unseen storage space. So okay, there's the storage space that is invisible to our human eyes, but it's always there, and it's always recording. That's why we call it the records. So this unseen storage space that's always recording. So what is it recording? It's recording basically everything. Well, it has recorded everything that has ever happened. So every action, every word, every deed, every choice we've ever made, every thought we've ever had, all of that is recorded in the records. So it's continually just there recording everything that's happening. Also, every time that our souls make the conscious choice to incarnate into a human physical body, that's when it's almost like a new chapter in our individual records, because we all have a personal record in the Akashic Records. So it's like a new chapter is created to capture and record all of the experiences that we're going to have in that particular human lifetime, in each lifetime, which is why we can go into the records to retrieve information, for example, about past life experiences, especially if there's unfinished business or unresolved trauma in a previous lifetime. Let's say if, and this is an example I see all the time with people, I'm sure you do as well, but if there has been a past life experience where we were a healer or a mystic or a visionary of some kind, and there were negative consequences to that. So maybe we were cast out, persecuted, rejected, our gifts were not accepted, whatever. So we might have made an unconscious decision in that past life. Okay, I'm never going to use my intuitive gifts again or my healing gifts again, because look where that gets me, right? So we might still have some of those blocks or the remnant of that trauma still going on somewhere in our energy field today. And so we can go back into the past through the records and clear that out kind of at the root level. But it's really important for me also to say that with the records, because sometimes there's this misconception or myth that we can only do past life healing through the records, which is absolutely not true. In fact, in my own work with clients, past life healing work is maybe 15% of what I do through the records. So not a huge thing at all. I only do it when it comes up, organically. We can do so much more with the records. So you can go into the records and discover what is your highest purpose. So what are you here to do? Everything we were saying before about remembering who you really are, why you're really here. What is that highest level purpose? How can you align with that? What does it look like day to day to express that purpose? And the records, of course, can also help us do things like, well, I refer to this as shedding human density, because just by virtue of being in human bodies with egos, interacting with other humans, with other egos, right? We're going to clash. We're going to pick up stuff that's not ours. I know you know this. And so including things like limiting beliefs, programming, conditioning that doesn't serve us, limiting ideas of ourselves, what we're capable of, what we're not capable of, so much that the world kind of imposes on us. So we're carrying that human density with us, but every time we tap into the records, which are existing at a higher level of consciousness, because the records are also a field of consciousness beyond the human dimension, we can shed that human density, egoic attachments and patterns, just anything we may have going on or attached to us on whatever level that doesn't serve us. The records can also help us shatter 3D illusions that we may have bought into. So, there's some really predominant illusions going on in the 3D worlds, like the illusion of separation, that we're separate, that we're alone, that whatever I do doesn't affect, my neighbor or whoever else, someone across the globe, which actually does affect them because we're all interconnected, right? But we forget that. So the illusion of separation, the illusion of lack, these types of things, when we connect to the records, we get to remember, oh, right, I'm not separate. I am not just part of the universe, but I am the universe. I am the universe expressing itself in this one human personality. And okay, right, there is no lack and there's abundance flowing all around me. How can I reconnect to that? So the records help us essentially come back home to ourselves in a lot of different ways and shed all of those layers of stuff and debris and density that is not serving us. And those are just some of the things. But that's a long answer. So let me pause there and make sure it's making sense.
That's amazing.
We want to keep hearing.
Oh, yeah.
Keep it long, please. But that sounds incredible. And now, yeah, there's so many questions right now, but maybe to walk people through the mechanics and in a simpler way, how do we navigate that world? How do we go there? What are the practices and how does one do that? And then a second part of my question would be, because in our work with angels and angelic beings, there's angels that support that work and that connection with the Akashic records. But whenever there's that connection, there's always a guide, a being of some sort that keeps your records. Like, who runs things up there in your experience,
Yes.
and how do they work with you?
Yes.
I'm guessing, again, we're not alone in that journey, so I'm guessing there's a whole set of beings that interact with us in that process.
Yes. Yeah, and let me answer that second question first, and then we'll talk about how do you access this field of consciousness. So yes, when you work in the records, you're working with what we call the record keepers. So these are benevolent beings of light who work with us in that space. We can think of them more as like universal spirit guides, right? We all have individual spirit guides and spirit team that works with us. But the record keepers are basically there to assist anyone who is accessing the records with a clear intention in an ethical way, right? There's like specific responsibilities that we have to take on and ways of accessing the records so that we're doing it all ethically and safely. But so the record keepers, and we can actually divide them. The way I teach this is there are 4 categories of record keepers. So the first category, these are the lords of the records. So the lords are basically the protectors of the records. They safeguard the records. So if you think of the records as a castle, then the lords are almost like the guards standing at the gates. So they protect, okay, who is accessing the records? Let's say if someone is trying to open someone else's records without permission, which is a big no-no. We can't do that. It's not ethical. So the lords are the ones who would just kind of close the gates, right, and not allow access in that case. And the lords also sometimes, because they do have a sense of humor, right? Sometimes, let's say if we're asking the same question over and over because we're not liking the answer that we're getting, or we don't want to fully receive the answer, then the lords are the ones that will lovingly kick us in the butt a little bit and like close the gates. And that's sometimes when people will go blank, right? Or they're like, oh, I don't even feel like I'm in the records anymore. It was like I got kicked out or something, which is all for our highest good and healing. It's like they're saying, go work on a new question, right? So those are the lords. Then we have the masters of the records, another type of record keeper. And masters do work with us more individually. So sometimes it's almost like when you start working with the records, you are basically like assigned a master to welcome you into the space, to guide you in the healing work that you're going to be doing. And masters, it's really interesting. They will show up in all kinds of different forms, depending on what is going to resonate with us the most. So I've had students where they see their master maybe as a wizard or Gandalf type figure, or as an animal. Sometimes masters show up as animals. So just if you're in the records and a figure shows up or an animal shows up, it's always a good idea to start a dialogue, and say, okay, who are you? Are you a master? What are you here to help me with? So on and so forth. Then we also have the teachers of the records. So teachers are there to help us receive and interpret the information accurately. So if you're ever in the records and you're like, this information is confusing, or I'm not fully getting this, or I needed another piece of the puzzle to put this together, that's when we can call for a teacher and say, oh, I need help interpreting this and putting it together. So a teacher will show up, or you'll just get, an additional insight that clicks things into place. And then finally, we have the loved ones. And this is a totally different category, because loved ones are the souls of beings that we once knew in this lifetime or a previous lifetime. So like actual humans. So for example, I'm very connected to my maternal grandfather in the records, who will show up for me as a loved one. So loved ones, ancestors can show up as well if they have messages for us, or if also they want to support the healing work that we're doing, especially when we're doing things like family lineage healing through the records, which we can do as well. Ancestors have a tendency to pop in, like if they want forgiveness from us, or if they need to give forgiveness, or if there's something unresolved in the family line, all of that can happen as well. So those are the record keepers. So, but how do we actually connect to the records? So, as I mentioned before, the records are operating and existing at a higher level of consciousness than the human dimension, which is mostly ego-based. So as humans, we're mostly operating in that linear, egoic level of consciousness. So basically, one of the things that's required to connect to the records is that we need to raise our frequency to be able to match the frequency of the records. So we need to do the work of clearing ourselves out of particularly what I call ego mind interference, which can show up in all kinds of ways. And that's true for so many spiritual practices as well. Like when people are trying to meditate, and they might have ego mind interference show up as getting distracted, getting physically restless or itchy all of a sudden. And it's like, you can't sit still, right? I see that as ego mind interference that's triggering the body. So you'll get up and you won't meditate, because the ego mind, doesn't like change, doesn't want things to change, generally is not happy if we are evolving, expanding, right? Because that means things are changing. So it's going to try to stop that in all kinds of different ways. So also making us judge the experience. So let's say if we're sitting there trying to clear ourselves out so we can connect to the records, which we do through a portal prayer. And I offer that in my free Akashic Records mini course. If anyone wants to check that out, we can give that to people at the end of this, or just go to my website. So let's say if you're sitting, you've said the portal prayer and you are trying to connect, you're trying to open the records and raise your frequency. So ego mind might pop in by making you think, oh, I'm doing this wrong. So perfectionism, right? Or like judging what's happening in the moment. Like there should be something else that should be happening now.
Is this
my
imagination?
Absolutely. 100%. That's one of the most common ones with the records. Like, am I just imagining this? Is this real? Am I kidding myself, right? Or who am I to connect to this field of consciousness? Or discounting what's happening, discounting our capacity to connect so much that can get in the way. So our task really is to notice those patterns and that interference when it comes up, and observe it and not try to push against it, because as we all know, that just makes it bigger, and just kind of recognize it for what it is, stay in the moment. And the two key attitudes to connect to the records are, of course, it's going to be so obvious, but trust is number one. So trusting the records that they're always going to give us exactly what we most need. They're never going to give us more or less than we can handle, than we need. And they're always going to take us where we most need to go. Also, trusting our own capacity to connect, trusting that we are worthy to connect is a big one that I see in students sometimes. Trusting that it's the healing process is going to be maybe sometimes even easier than we think it might be, right? Healing can be easy, or it could be more effortless than it's been in the past. So just a lot of different forms of trust. And then the second attitude is surrender, because we're not in control. Once we open the records, we're not in control of where we're going to go. We have to surrender to the mystery of where they're going to take us if we want to get the most out of it. And so it's like I always say, once you open the records, you've spoken the portal prayer, you have a clear intention, you're allowing the records to take you where you need to go. You're not driving the bus anymore. It's
Right.
like you're sitting in the passenger seat, and the record keepers are driving the bus at that point. And it's best to just enjoy the scenery, right? And let them drive the bus, which is nice because we don't have to do all the work ourselves. We can collaborate with them. So yeah, is all of that making sense so far? Okay.
That makes a
So
lot of
good.
totally.
Yeah.
I think there's a very important piece there around, yeah, the surrender and trusting that what they're showing you is what you need to see and that there's no more, no less. I think with Akashic Records and things like past life healing, there's a bit of curiosity around it, but it has to have intention and purpose. Like you're not just not gonna go there looking for just to take a peek and see what's in there,
Right.
but the intention setting feels to me like a very important aspect of the process.
Yes. Yeah, I'm so glad you're bringing that up. And you're also making me think about, in my Akashic Records certification program, one of the principles that I teach my students, I call it current lifetime relevance.
Hmm.
Because even though, as I said, we can go into the records and we could spend years upon years looking at past life information and experiences and memories, which is great. And I'm sure there's going to be a lot that's going to come up if we do that. But we always need to have first and foremost a present oriented focus. So we always have to say, okay, I'm going to go into the records and I'm going to see what comes through. And then whatever it is, I'm going to apply it to where I am today. And I'm going to ask, how does this illuminate where I am today, the challenges of today that I'm facing, the issues and the patterns of today? Like, how is this going to help me resolve that or expand or heal, so that we're not getting just lost in the past for its own sake, right? Getting overwhelmed by what we're seeing. So we always want to come back to that current lifetime relevance and then superimpose like whatever we're getting from the records onto that present day that we're experiencing. Yeah.
Yeah, that makes so much sense because I do feel like sometimes we can get caught up in like this
Yes.
loop of the past, and not even on purpose, but we just end up focusing on the past and focusing here and I need to heal more and there's more to heal and that sort of a thing. And one of the things that you mentioned, and I'm curious to hear your perspective because I've heard before, as when you're accessing the records, how sometimes it's all about kind of like the question that you're asking. So I'm curious to know about, do you go into it with that intention of like, I'm going to go in, I'm going to ask a specific question about what I need to be able to move forward, let's say, for example, or do you go in with a very much like openness of whatever comes through is going to come through and then I'll see how that applies to my life? Do you see what I'm saying? Like the difference between that? How does that work with the records?
That is a brilliant question as well. So I basically, again, I teach my students there's different kinds of work we can do with the records. So there's passive work. I call it passive work that we can do with the records, which means, okay, you're just going to open the records and your only intention is I'm going to connect to this higher field of consciousness and be held by it and just allow it to flow through me. And I'm just going to be in that field. Like, that's it. And there's no other agenda. There's no questions. So you can just be and surrender, which actually is a great practice in and of itself, because a lot of us might resist just being and not doing. I'm a recovering overachiever, so it's, even for me, it's like difficult sometimes to just be. So that's a great practice, and the records can help us with that. So that's more just passively being there. And sometimes the most powerful transformative insights, healing, clearings can happen when we're just there and we're just surrendered totally. And then, of course, we can also do more active work with the records, which is what I teach my students to do, like with specific protocols and step by step. Like, okay, so how do you formulate a question? What question are you going to ask? Or how do you do healing work in the records? How do you do past life healing? How do you do shadow work through the records? There's so many different possibilities of things we can do. So for all of those things, I have specific step by step protocols. So that's just more about going in there actively. Let me be a participant in the process of collaborating with the record keepers and like getting specific things done, right? Or let's say if we notice, oh, okay, I have this recurrent pattern going on in my life and and it's not serving me, and I want to understand what that's about and clear it out at the root level. So then you can specifically go in to ask about that. So the work can be both just really open, where you are totally going with the flow, receiving whatever needs to come through in the moment, which is great. Or it can also be a lot more structured and a lot of things in between the two.
Oh, I love that. I love how you can kind of like pick your own adventure. Like, do I just want to know?
Yes, it's so true. And every opening, every journey into the records is unique.
Yeah.
And is going to be different. Sometimes the record keepers, because they're so wise, sometimes they know, okay, what you most need today is just to be totally silent for 15 minutes. So you'll open the records and they'll just be silence. Right. And sometimes people freak out in the beginning, right? Because they're like, I'm not getting anything. Am I doing it wrong? That's why we have to have this radical trust that even if you're getting silence for 15 minutes, that was purposeful for whatever reason. And that's what you most needed in that moment. So just don't fight against it. Just try to receive whatever they're giving you in that moment.
Right. Yeah.
That's a great example, and that tying to my next question, because I mean, for to work with the Akashic Records, of course, you'd want to do it with someone professional like yourself, right? To help guide that journey. For people exploring that and that are not necessarily attuned with their clairs necessarily, and is not someone that's clairvoyant or clairsentient or things like that, like how do you, like, does everyone get, how does that look like for different people? Are you all the time, are you going to see things, are you going to hear things? Like, in your experience, what are the different ways in which you capture that information?
Yeah that's great. And I just had a new student a little bit freaking out because she was like, I've never been able to visualize anything my whole life. Am I not going to be able to work with the records? And that's a question I hear all of the time. And it's not true at all. So there are so many different ways of receiving when we're in the records. And even for me, it's like I see flashes of images. I don't see a perfect movie ever. And I've been working with the records for 21 years. So, but primarily for me, it's claircognizance. So I'll just open and I'll just know, like, oh, okay, right. Like, that's the truth of this situation, or that's the thing that I need to remember today, whatever, at a higher level. So it could be downloads of information. It could be insights. It could be images, if people can see. It can also be physical sensations. So which again, people sometimes discount that, but that can be a really powerful way of receiving. So physical sensations, even emotions. So for example, if you go into the records and let's say you're asking about a specific pattern in your life today, let's say something like, why can't I break through a certain income ceiling or something, whatever. Like every time I try to do that, I hit up against a block or something. So maybe you go into the records and immediately you feel like a sense of loss or grief or abandonment, right? And you're having this like strong emotional reaction, which could be pointing you to, oh, that's an unresolved emotion, like maybe from a past life where something happened. Like maybe you had a bunch of abundance and then you lost it. Or someone left you because they were jealous or they wanted it for themselves or whatever the past situation might have been. So, on some level, you might still be carrying that unprocessed emotion, and the records can help bring that to the surface so you can see it, feel it, express it, let it move through you. So, that can be another way of receiving information. Also, yeah, hearing. So, sometimes people, it's like they hear the record keepers, or sometimes it's just more hearing the voice of their own higher self, because the records certainly can help us connect to our higher, wisest aspects because we're getting beyond that ego mind, so we can reconnect to that inner, still wise voice within. So sometimes that's how the information comes through. But yeah, it's so important to remember all of those are valid forms, even though sometimes it feels like it's like we put clairvoyance on a pedestal or something sometimes, I think. And people are like, wait, if I can't do that one. But I have had many students where they are not at all primarily clairvoyant, and they do really powerful work in the records with their own clients. So
I think that's something that keeps coming up. Like, you don't have to know necessarily or be able to differentiate between who's talking to you and who's doing the
yeah.
work, as long as you're fine with the fact that it's happening, the healing
Yes.
and
Yes.
whatever comes up is through to you. I wanted to go to Christina for a second because just I want to tie this into the angelic side of
Yeah,
things and how
absolutely.
you experience the
Yeah.
records and how you work with them with Archangel
Oh, nice.
Jeremiah.
Raziel.
Raziel.
Yeah.
Sorry. Jeremiah is past lives.
Yeah, he's past lives. Yeah, yeah. So could be. And the way that I've seen it is that Raziel kind of steps forward very similarly. I feel like I forget which term you had used, Josephine. I think as the master in when you
Oh,
were
okay.
I
Yes.
think master.
Okay.
And yeah, so he's the archangel that I've seen come through a lot because he kind of has that energy of like wisdom and helping us to understand spiritual
Oh,
truths and connecting us back to our inner wisdom and things like that, So
yes.
he's the angel that I've seen the most there. Although I have seen, I think also similarly, like as masters, other angels coming forward as well, like Archangel Gabriel is one that kind of pops up. But Raziel is like the main one that I've experienced through my personal journey, my work with regards to that.
Yeah.
So to me, it's really amazing to just see how I'm always so fascinated by how the different beings interact with each other, or like the angels and like these guys and this, and how it just like all connects together. So,
It's so true.
yeah, yeah,
Can I say something about that? Just because I
yeah.
recently had a student in my certification program, and she, already before stepping into the program, was working with archangels just as regularly. And she's a practitioner as well. So when we started doing my healing protocol through the records, which again is a whole step by step thing. And every time she was like, oh, Archangel Raphael is like showing up for every single
Oh,
time I do a healing
wow.
protocol with one of my clients or practice buddies. So that, yeah, she started like just allowing that to
So
happen.
cool.
And yeah,
Yeah.
which was really cool for me to see.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. I love hearing that. And I love, yeah, it's like just knowing that their presence can be there and to guide us also. Because I know that sometimes, just through my work and the people who kind of find my work, they're very, kind of like feel like angels is like a safe
Yeah.
energy to connect with type
Mhm.
of a thing. So they feel more comfortable exploring things with the guidance of the angels. So
Yes.
it's great to know that, through your experience too, that you've seen that, or like people experience that. It feels like it's kind of what's meant for you, what you're most resonant with. Those are the energies that will come in to support whatever you're exploring, you
Yes,
know?
100%. And it makes me sad when I see, like, I've seen, and of course everyone is free to teach however they want to teach, right? But I've seen some Akashic Records teachers where they'll say, no angels, no archangels, none of that is
What?
going to show up in the records.
Oh no.
No any other kinds of beings of light. And I'm like, wait, first of
Why?
all,
Like,
you can't control that. Like,
yeah.
just by saying that. Second of all, of course, like, you're also gonna have your personal spirit guides, and
Yeah,
any benevolent energy that's working with you, of course, is gonna show up in the records, right? Because as you said, it's there to help, to support, to help you feel safe, which is so important when working with the records, to help you feel grounded, to have that sense of like you're being nourished, or whatever you most need. So for me, there's a lot of overlap. Like, I'm not a teacher where it's like we have to put rigid,
right.
delineations of like, if you're in the records, you can't do this or that. Like, I don't believe in that. So
Yeah.
Yeah, I love that. It totally resonates with the way that I teach as well. Kind of like that very same vibe. So,
yeah,
yeah.
that's nice.
So, in terms of working with the records, is it something that you do like just specifically to work in a certain issue? Is it something that can be just part of your spiritual practice and you can kind of have that connection all the time, help you connect with your higher self, like
Yeah.
on an ongoing basis, or what is the approach?
Yeah, that's great. So, when I just started a new cohort of my certification program, and one of the first things I say to them is, okay, great. So we're all here. You're here. One of the reasons you're here is because you want to learn this structured framework for accessing the records, doing healing work in the records, like very intentionally. And at the same time, my belief and my experience is that really it's our natural state to be
Mhm,
connected to what we call the records just 24/7, like with
mhm,
no interruption, no interference, while you're still fully embodied as a human, right? So that you're totally grounded, you're living your human day to day life, but you're also totally, I call it more of the vertical connection,
mhm,
right? So you're vertically connected as well to divine source or the records. And just as you're going about your day, you're receiving whatever you most need. Or if a challenge comes up, the record keepers are there, like, okay, solve it this way or try this thing. And it's just, there's this flow and there's this ease that opens up when we can live that way. Of course, it takes work, time, practice to get
mhm,
there to that level of connection. I'm still an ongoing work in progress with that too. But for myself, for example, I haven't. The last time I closed the records was probably 2 years ago. So they've just been open for me perpetually for 2 years now. And then it was 2 years ago where I was in there and the record keepers were like, you don't have to close us ever again. Right? They were like, you're
is it
there
just
now.
you or is that
Um,
everyone?
yeah, I'm sorry, what, go ahead.
No, that it was that's just you, or that's like generally speaking, everyone
Oh, yeah, that
just
was
can
like
be
my
open and
personal
oh,
experience
okay, okay,
with
okay.
them. Yeah, where they were like, you can just keep us open. Because I was still doing the whole approach of, I'm going to open them, I'm going to do whatever I need to do, I'm going to close them. But yeah, a couple of years ago, they were like, you could just leave us open. And that ideally, that's what I'm also supporting my students to get to that place too, right? Where, because the thing is, in the beginning, when we first start accessing them, it takes a little bit for the physical body to acclimate, like to that level, to that frequency, to that light and the energy of the records. So we wouldn't necessarily want to just keep them open indefinitely. So we want to open, have an experience, close it, close the records, then integrate that and just be really responsible about all of that. But you can open the records every day, right? I have many students that do that every day as part of their morning practice, or they'll just open, maybe do a little meditation in the records, and or open the records and then pull a card of the day, which so we can combine these things. Again, it's like just we can experiment. It's not rigid. So we can pull a card, and then the record keepers can help you interpret the card, or like direct your attention to specific colors on the card or a number on the card, like if people are working with cards, or do any of your other practices as well and have the records there too, which can help to supercharge what you're already doing. Yeah. Did that answer the question? Okay, great.
Yes.
Yeah, that's amazing. I love that. It really feels like it's so supportive of, if we think to this conversation of how we're moving from the 3D to the 4D to the 5D, how we're going through this ascension process, right? Like on a collective level, and this collective spiritual evolution that's happening that we are living in right now. It really feels like it helps us to elevate to not just even like frequency wise, like that, of course, but also just in terms of our awareness and our consciousness and like what we have access to, and then how we're able to then apply that in real time in our everyday life. Right? Is that how it shows up for you? Like now that you mentioned the, like having the open records kind of like all the time, like is it kind of like moment to moment you feel like, because I was going to ask you, like, have you noticed a difference from like prior 2 years ago when you were opening, closing versus now that it's always open, how you're receiving information or how you're maybe more responsive in a situation versus reactive, like from our ego,
No, yeah, you're hitting the nail on the head, because it really is about, for me, it has been mostly about, having the records open all of the time. And by the way, that's not a requirement, right? You can still open and close them as needed and still do powerful, amazing work. But having them open all of the time, for me, what it has allowed me to do is it's like I can much more quickly like see through the physical appearance of a situation, if that makes sense, right?
Yeah.
Or like if I'm getting triggered by something or someone, or like someone criticize you or whatever, or you take it as a criticism, like whatever's happening in day-to-day life, or some challenge comes up, or like my husband doesn't take out the trash or whatever, and I'm like, again, you did that. But then it's like immediately I can see into the spiritual reality, like behind the appearance of, or whatever I'm getting caught up in at that ego level, which means I have reclaimed a lot of time and energy that used to be wasted, right? Because when we are in that triggered state and we're taking things personally, or we're trying to defend ourselves or attack the other person, whatever, prove that we're right, all of these ego attachments, we're using up a lot of time and energy doing that. And it takes time to get out of that trigger state, right? Sometimes it's like a whole day where you're pissed at someone, or you are like writing the angry text that you're going to send to them for 2 days. And that is distracting you away from your path and from your highest level purpose. And you're wasting time and energy doing that. And that's one of the most potent things the records can help us do, is like reclaim that time and energy and focus, and not have those distractions kind of pull at us as much, which is huge, right? So
oh my gosh, I love that so much.
yeah,
that's the dream.
Yeah, that's
like
big.
Just waking up and just be able to move through life, like not with your human is not in control 100% of the time, and trying to just connect to that higher self like throughout your day and in different situations. So amazing.
Yeah,
To
it's
be able
huge.
to
Yes.
yeah
Yeah, that's so good.
I wanted to go back to maybe just part of my curiosity again. If you have a lovely professional like yourself with you, helping you or Cristina helping you interpret what's going on, maybe if you're sensitive, if you're feeling things physically, that's fantastic. But how do I interpret that? How do I apply it to my life? What is the lesson? Like, what are some ways in which we can start to interpret those messages and get more, I'm guessing like anything, like a muscle, you just work out enough, you're going to strengthen the muscle. We've talked about the faith muscle as well recently. I'm guessing it's just practice, 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 right?
Yeah, it is practice. It's also, the way I put it is, mastering the records. It is like mastering a new language,
Mm-hmm.
because they speak to us in metaphors and symbols. And sometimes it takes a while to get used to how the records are communicating with each of us specifically, which is also unique to each of us.
Yeah.
Well, actually, I also want to go back and speak to something we touched on before, which was, when people go in and they're like, am I just imagining this? Am I
Mm-hmm.
just making this up?
Yes.
And
Yeah.
how I answered that is, actually, you don't have to shut off your imagination. That the last thing I would want you to do is shut off your imagination when you're going into the records, because the record keepers are going to use your imagination as one of the vehicles to
Mm.
communicate with you. And they're also going to use, like, everything you have in your stored in your memory, everything you have in your conscious mind, in your unconscious mind. So let's say if someone, and they're going to speak to you in a language that you're going to start to understand. So let's say if someone grew up loving like a particular Disney movie or something, just as an example. So the record keepers might show you an image of the character from that movie, or like give you a sentence that the character spoke in the movie, right? Like to give you a specific message. So you have to stay open to that. And also, it's about, whenever the record keepers give us messages, typically there's multiple layers of meaning to those messages. So sometimes there's like a literal meaning. Let's say if they give you an image of like an orange, like the fruit, like, I know you said you're in the records and you're seeing an orange. So the literal meaning could be, oh, okay, it might be physically nourishing for you to have some more vitamin C or something, which is very literal, right? But we could also look at more of a metaphorical meaning, which maybe is like, oh, if you, maybe the image is like, oh, the orange, the skin is peeling off or something, right? So it could be like, oh, okay, there's something else, some other layer of conditioning you're being asked to peel away, right? Or so we need to look at all of the facets of like, what are we receiving? What are the potential meanings? If there are symbols in what we're receiving, what are those symbols about? Sometimes I even just say to my students, Google it. Like, if you Google it, what comes up? And
Right.
just go with your intuition about whatever is showing up. Sometimes we just have to let it percolate. Sometimes we have to journal about it to understand it, right? So if I'm getting a physical sensation and I'm not sure, how does that connect to something going on in my life today? So you might sit down and journal. Okay, so when's the last time you
Mm-hmm.
experienced that physical sensation? Have you felt that in your life before? What does it remind you of? Is it connected to a particular state of being? Like, what is it bringing to the forefront in your experience? So yeah, I teach, a few different strategies for how to interpret what's coming through, but it definitely is a process of building up your relationship to the record keepers, understanding how they communicate
Mm-hmm.
with you, and also it's also really about being a really curious listener and like observer of whatever they're giving us, because we don't want to discount it. We don't want to jump to conclusions too quickly. We don't want to interpret too quickly. We really want to take our time with all
Yeah.
of that, so so we can decipher it as accurately as possible.
Okay.
That's so, I just have to say, I really resonate with the way that you teach this because it's very similar to how I teach
Oh,
it too. Like
nice.
with the imagination thing, like that's one
Yeah.
of the things that I tell people. I'm like, your imagination is your superpower when you're developing your
Yes.
clairvoyance and like wanting to strengthen that. I'm like, use your imagination to the
Yes.
best of your abilities. And yeah, I just really loved everything that you shared there. It's
Cool.
so like so powerful and I think so helpful for people to just see it from this perspective and like these different layers of how we can begin to understand the
Yes.
messages the layers within that and then integrate that,
Yes.
So
Yeah. Awesome.
You
Yeah.
have so many questions. We could keep going on and
I
on.
know.
Maybe one last question before we run out of time. So, are the records, so the time in between, because this is the records of your lifetimes,
Yeah.
right? So, is the in between lives, is there a connection with the Akashic Records as well? Is that the place where your soul goes and sort of like regroups and
Right.
plans and does all those things, or are those different
Yeah.
places?
Yes. These are all amazing questions, by the way. So, yeah, it is totally possible to go into, because the records are recording like everything in the universe as well.
Mm-hmm.
So, you can go into the records and explore in between lifetime experiences or decisions. So I refer to this as the in between lifetimes council, which I'm sure,
Yes,
people have
council. Yeah,
different ideas of how that works.
yeah.
But when we return to non physical form and we're basically having a meeting, right? We're having a debrief. Like, what did you do? What did you learn? What did you fail to learn that you're going to have to learn the next time? All from a highest place of love, wisdom, all of that. So the way I see it is like, yes, we go back to, I don't know if it's always necessarily the records. I see it as the records, but I just see like the meeting room and the record keepers come forth and all of our guides come forth and we're making those decisions about
Mhm.
what are we going to tackle in the next lifetime. Who's going to be there? Who are the players going to be that are going to most trigger us so that we can grow the most, right? Like my mother-in-law, just kidding.
Yeah.
Right. And and they're volunteering for that, right?
Yeah,
At a soul level to play whatever dynamic needs to be played out the next time. So yeah, we can go into the records to explore what
yeah.
decisions did we make at that level.
That's so interesting. Yeah, the council has been coming up for me, things that I'm reading and learning about. So yeah, I had that, but I didn't necessarily made the connection. Are these the records? Is this the same place? And yeah, the characters and the assembling of that cast is really
Yeah, the
interesting
cast.
because, as you put it, like, being the villain of the story, and when we understand it through our human perspective, it's easy to just see them as the villain, and then when
Right.
we understand them from a higher perspective, as this is a soul that's helping you grow the most at an accelerated pace, the most, and that's why they're here to trigger you that much. So they're
Yeah.
actually in service of your soul development. So they're actually not a bad guy. They're really
I know.
great soul that volunteer to do that work with you. So seeing
Yes.
them like that helps to break through the illusion. And it's like, you're not my enemy. You're actually helping me.
Right.
Thank you. And kind of trying to
I
center
know.
again.
Yeah. And it's incredible sometimes, like, because when a soul is volunteering to play that role for someone else, and it's like, wow, that is a huge sacrifice on some level for them,
Yeah.
even though it's like, it's difficult sometimes to see it that way. But it really is. And they are, yeah, it's like we have to thank them as much as we can. Like, doesn't mean you have to love everyone, but
Yeah.
that they are
Yeah.
in service of our evolution. So,
Exactly.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. So fascinating. I love this so much. And yeah,
yeah,
I feel like
so
we could
cool.
keep going for another
We
2 hours, like
Yeah.
talking about all these things. It's so amazing. Josephine, as we wrap up, if you would love to share about where people can find you and connect with you. And you mentioned that mini course earlier. So please let us know where we can find that. And then if you have any parting words of wisdom or anything that you want to share, then please feel free to share.
Yes. Thank you. So, to connect with me, the easiest way is my website, josephinehardman.com. And you'll see the mini course right there at the top if you want to sign up for that, which again is totally free. I also have a YouTube channel that I've started to put more work and development into. So also through the website, you can get there and check that out. I have videos on like, what can you ask the Akashic Records? How can you tell if you are in the records? All kinds of
Mhm.
resources that can help as people develop that connection. And then, yeah, so last words. Something I've been thinking about a lot is because I do think, in the world that we are today, like everyone knows this, but there's a lot going on. right? Like
Yeah.
there's a lot going on all of the time, just like coming at us all of the time. And a lot of chaos, collective chaos, fear, confusion, so much, and so many distractions that could potentially pull us off our path. And I think it's so important at this time, for those of us who are here as light workers, light leaders, whatever we want to call it, like it's so important that we recommit. This is what I've been feeling, at least, like
Yeah.
personally, and seeing in a lot of my students, just that we recommit to that path of the light, right? And of integrity, like deep integrity, because sometimes we are going to be seduced and tempted and into giving up that integrity or going into the collective confusion, whatever. But we have like such sacred work here to do, that is so important that we don't allow those external distractions to make us veer away from that path and that highest purpose that we're here to fulfill, because we each have such a unique purpose, which is like essential that we fulfill that purpose for the evolution of all of us collectively. So each of us like really does have a big role to play in that, and I just really want people to like remember how important they are in that sense.
That's so amazing, so beautiful. Thank you so much for sharing that. I really, really love that. It really touched me. And I think it's really going to resonate with so many of our listeners. So we just want to say thank you so much again for joining us today. This was such an amazing conversation, so empowering, so like mind opening. We really enjoyed it, and really encouraging those of you who really resonated with this to go check out Josephine, go to her website. The links are going to be in the description, in the show notes below. So go check that out. And thank you again, Josephine. This was amazing.
Oh, thank you so
Yeah.
much for having me. I would love to go on and on and on for hours, but yeah, this was
Please
awesome.
come back. We can
Yeah,
just
we can
do
do part
another
two.
round.
Part two.
Part two. Yeah, we can do a part two. Absolutely. And go a little deeper. We would love to have you again.
Awesome.
Amazing.
Yeah, thank you.
Amazing. All
Awesome.
right.
Thank you so
Okay,
much.
bye bye.
Bye.